Let me first start off by saying I have no disclosures here, financial or label usage to disclose. I want to mention this as I start on this second part, something I probably didn't highlight as much. One of the things we have to be careful of, there's so much attention on our emotional health during this pandemic time and trying to help people that we've sometimes maybe inadvertently medicalized or pathologized some normal issues. It would be really normal for all of us to have different symptoms, emotional stress symptoms that we may not have had before. And only when it gets to a certain level do people actually need to have special intervention. So I think we have to be careful that we don't send the message sometimes that everybody needs help, as opposed to, no, only when it reaches a certain threshold. We don't want to let people know that a normal response to these kind of not so normal situations would be a bad thing. We should have responses that don't feel so normal to us because we don't experience them all the time. So just a quick word on that. Sometimes there's so much help and there's so much information that people almost give themselves the idea that maybe they're the ones that have an undue problem when they may not at all. It may just be the normal consequence of the stress. Lots of help that's out there too can be confusing at times because there's so many different areas to turn. All right, so I will dive in. So I mentioned at the break that I would talk about management job satisfaction. I think there's a fair amount of you that are leaders here. I do an awful lot of work with leaders individually here in the Mayo campus, and I do trainings for groups of managers, and sometimes these are several hours long. But as we look at the issue of what does it mean when we use the word resilience, and again, I'm so nervous at times to use the word because of the connotation that it's gotten in this current time, but we're really just talking about, it's been around forever, the thought, just the different terms. All we're really talking about is how do people get through difficult times, adverse conditions, or times in the least damaging way to themselves and get back to at least a previous level of functioning or higher. That's all it really means. It means as we go through a tough time, how do we minimize some of the effects of the tough time? And if we stay within our kind of purview of the emotional central nervous system, how do we do that with our thoughts and our emotions and behavior, right? And so for management, companies have asked all the time, and certainly here at Mayo Pockets as well, saying, how do we help our leaders make sure that they're doing okay? Because they have a ton of stress on them, given all the issues that have happened as well. And so I've already done the same work before the pandemic to talk about leadership resilience and what makes a good manager and work-life balance, and what when managers tend to leave or get so frustrated they leave positions or are unhappy themselves. It's almost always related to people management issues, right? Management, the tough part is, if you've been in position, is managing people with different views, different ideas, different behaviors, different thoughts. And so for leadership, there are basic fundamental principles for me to say that when we are unified, and HR and my leadership team, including upper leadership, we're on the same page about various topics. So this is just touching the surface here quickly. Teamwork. Teamwork is not for me about feelings. Teamwork is a concept that I hear so much that gets mixed up in all different industries. Teamwork is really about performance from a management point of view. No matter who likes who gets along or not, teamwork is about the outcome. I always give the examples of medical procedures, surgery, or building a building. We may be friends or not, but do we get the tasks done on time, and are they done correctly? So whether it's a group of diverse staff working in different occupational areas coming together, or building a wall or building, and the electricians, the plumbers, the cement, we may or may not like each other particularly or care for each other, but do we get the job done? Do we actually produce an outcome? And that's really, really important about teamwork. Work culture, on the other hand, is about behavior. That's about how people express their thoughts and their views, and they manifest that in behavioral form in either ways of verbal, nonverbal communications, right? Their actions, what they do, what they say. And those things, managers need to know how to manage teamwork, performance issues, and they need to know principles of employee behavior management as a group or culture, and certainly individual behavior management when there's difficult or disagreements in performance or behavior with employees. And so I spend a lot of time on that, and it's really, really important that we define what I've done most of my career is define these very specifically. Otherwise, if we use kind of the standard definitions, we get really lost. Work culture is about traditions, ideologies, beliefs that manifest a wide variety of differences in the workplace about what people think is okay to say and do and what's not. It has to be from whatever the organization is itself, no matter who we are, our personality types, all of those things. We need to be able to manage ourselves in the context of the work culture, respectful environment, no matter how much we disagree or agree. And managers have a lot of ability, they usually don't think they do, to manage workplace culture initiatives and to manage the teamwork aspect. Complaint management, I have a slide on in a minute, I'll show you. It's number one. Most people get out of leadership when they're frustrated on their life and their balance. It's because of complaint issues. When people come in to complain, they don't know how to sort it out, or not strong at it, or their central nervous system is either wired to be aggressive or to be nervous, and that blocks the whole process. And so I'll talk about a slide that's a model I developed a number of years ago to actually conduct and manage a very uncomfortable conversation with an employee. Most of my life is about working with people about how to manage discomfort, right? How to manage uncomfortable situations appropriately within the company's respectful kind of guidelines, and certainly compassion even for the individual that you really disagree with. Compassionate, but be firm, and to be clear about expectations and accountability, right? And then I have this little spot, apply reasonable efforts to impact opinions. There's a lot of naivete by well-meaning people in both leadership and sometimes in HR who will say, just do this, and your job is to convince people to be on board. Your job is to help them understand or get it. And I never say that. As I look at, and hopefully what you follow to point here is that we are unique. Some people will stay with very different views. I may stay with very different views. You may stay based upon our intimate thoughts and our views that someone may or may not have any ability to impact our opinions. So we should never have to worry about trying to change somebody's neuronal structure and leadership about are they on the bus or not, but we do have to hold people accountable and be respectful and compassionate, but be accountable to what we hold people to, irregardless of what they believe or not about certain changes or work-related issues, right? So we try reasonable efforts, not above and beyond. That just leads to more tension, conflict. It maybe I've used the phrase a lot. Look, I know you don't get, I know you don't understand or agree with me, or that you have a very different view. However, in fairness to you, out of an employee of mine that I care about, and as a person, I care about you. So therefore, I need to let you know in no uncertain terms where we're at, right? And that is a very benevolent thing to do when it's done in the right way. So a lot of time being in the planning stage of this, really important for leaders to feel supported to do that, not split. We have to be on the same page, right? If leaders have their own issues, then senior leadership needs to manage that. We need to be able to manage the front lines and be in unified agreement for everyone's benefit. And avoid enmeshment. That's a term, a psychological term, that when people get too enmeshed emotionally with even an employee and try to extend beyond our limits and our bounds, and we break boundaries, right? I know that happens when a manager will call me and say, okay, this person's in a very dangerous situation outside of work. We have to do something to fix it. I need to know what I can do and what you can do. That I hear that sometimes in the rapidness and the emergency of their voice. And I can tell that they care greatly for the person, right? So what we need to do is be able to back up from that and have boundaries to be able to say, there's only so much I can do. So here at Mayo, when people come in with personal issues, I tell our leadership, you have a couple portals. Your first response, of course, is great compassion and care, and making sure the person is safe or okay. Second piece is to, no matter what the issue they bring up, it could be emotional health, family, domestic, medical. The issue becomes, after I assess for immediate safety, if there's an issue that's overt, that someone has said something about harm, otherwise it becomes 2 to 3 standard resources as a leader That's as much as I can do. I will refer you to an employee assistance program if you have that. Here's information you need to know. Here's who they are. Here's how you contact them. Here's what they do. Contact primary care, another really good endorsed effort. And another one would be if your organization has wellness programs. We have a plethora of wonderful wellness programs and websites that have great resources and personal self-care and modules. I encourage managers to never go outside of that bound. When you start to refer people to certain books on different topics, psychological health, when you start to refer them to agencies or personal counselors, now you've walked in a whole nother domain that HR might go, right? We've walked into something very different. We have a potential issue of somebody feeling later that was used against them, that revealed information, and even your referral to psychological resources in the community. So your organization may have different beliefs in that. I always just throw it out. Use the ones that are endorsed by the organization to help people with the array and complexities of personal, emotional life health. And then that last piece is managing difficult employee conversations, and I'll touch that in another slide in a minute. So complaint management, and I'll just cover this. I used to get a lot of weird looks. I would present this in crowds of 100 managers at a time, and I would get some strange looks and questions at the Q&A at first. And I would say to people, the number one thing you have to do when you're a manager is you better teach employees how to complain. And people go, well, I have an open door policy. What do you mean teach? I'm like, you can have an open door policy, but have it with parameters and fairness to the employee and fairness to you. People need to know. You want them to know when they come in and speak with you, you want them to be thinking about how to present their issue within the culture of your particular work area and environment. So in other words, there's 3 areas generally, and we roll that out either during the time you meet with somebody or in group meetings. Encourage strategic plans that talk about that. We may have different views and opinions, and I do want to hear different views and opinions, but before you approach me, I want you to be thinking about these things. I want to know before you come in, you be thinking about this, who or what is preventing you from doing your job. Maybe nobody's preventing them, maybe nothing. But if there is someone's not doing a protocol, they have a different view of it, they make my job harder, this system, this equipment, we expect people to come in with those views. We may agree, you may agree as a leader or not, but you want them to come in so you can talk about that. And you can either do your due diligence and check on an issue and get back to them, or you may in the moment be able to say, here's where we're at on that, and we've explained that before, right? We go into a great detail about training sessions about how to do that. It's really important to have that kind of conversation, though, to let people know, what may or may not change. There's a really good idea. I'll take this, get back to you. On the other hand, we brought this up again, Mark. You've been in my office how many times? This isn't going to change. Out of respect to you, it's not going to change. I'm not going to tell you I'm doing something with this when I'm not. We've talked about it as a leadership team and function. I realize you don't like this, but this is where it's at. And out of respect to you, I want you to know that, right? Second area of a potential complaint is about acute safety issues. Obviously, you want to know that immediately, or some kind of a major breach, some compliance, some violation that makes it pretty clear for you to get on the phone with your leadership in HR in a hurry, right? That doesn't happen very often, but when it does, people generally know where to go. It's the third area that presents global problems across the planet, right? And we expect that because as human beings, we have different thoughts. I've made a living around mail talking about perception diversity, not talking about anything to do with culture or race, talking about just perception, no matter who we are, due to that complicated neuronal thing that I just tried to touch on our presentation earlier. We perceive things sometimes very similar, other times very different. I still can't understand, like for me, I'm afraid of heights, right? And I'm afraid of dangerous kinds of rides. And then I know people who will bungee jump, and probably some of you have bungee jumped. And I would rather just shoot me. I don't want to bungee. I mean, just the thought of that fear would do it for me, right? So we have very different views about lots of things, food that we eat, activities, different values. So employees come in, we expect them about something that's annoying or bothering them about the job. Policies, procedures, peers, issues, whatever it is, something's bothering them. And that's that open door kind of thing, but with parameters, right? And parameters kind of meaning to always be respectful, And as you talk about your colleagues, I want you to know that your colleagues are valued still, even if there's issues, and they also are my employee. They're my employee. So I don't allow people to come in and just beat up or bash someone who's my employee, who I have to take accountability for, and it's not respectful to them. So you come in and you can tell me what the factual issues are related to something they said, or something that they did, or if it's about a procedure or policy again, you can come in and talk about that to me and I'll sort it out, right? But always respectful conversation, because that emulates work culture. My definition of work culture, as I mentioned, is just behavior. It's about what we say and what we do. Only two ways behavior manifests, right? What do we actually do in our actions and what do we say in our words? And we always want people to come in who are frustrated human beings. We're going to be frustrated. We're going to have different views, but you must do it in the context of our cultural norms that we have here. And that's different, right? It can change by different organizations and different positions. So it really needs to be clear, whatever area I manage, to make sure that people know what our cultural norms are and our respectful guidelines about how we disagree. I used to talk about disagree with style, disagree with character, right? And hold people accountable and let them know that I'm going to hold you accountable, right? No matter what, and hold everybody accountable, right? And then this is an acronym our EAP staff came up with a number of years ago in a retreat that we were doing, and trying to come up with, we do the same process that we do now, that we've done for many years, but we wanted to make it a little more of a process and have an acronym so that it was about the phase of a meeting, how to have a difficult management conversation. And so we broke it down just by the acronym SAFE, which has nothing to do with safe. It's just an acronym for structure of the meeting. And this is much more involved, and even have some videos as we do that within our Mayo facility here in our media group, that we have videos about these little 5-minute, 2-minute EAP manager minute episodes, we call them, about key topics about managing the workplace. And in there, we have this process that kind of says, look, the first thing you do when you have a very uncomfortable meeting with someone is you plan to have that meeting. It's a short meeting. It's kind of a one-sided meeting on purpose. It's compassionately done, but firmly done. And you set expectations about the meeting and about listening at this point, and not even necessarily sharing all of your thoughts and views potentially about what I'm going to say to you. It's a management meeting. It's done this way because of our central nervous system, quite frankly. If you're someone who gets more aggressive when you're frustrated, then sometimes you say things you wish had not. If, on the other hand, you get more of the flight piece, the way you're wired in your central nervous system, you may never get to the real issue here, because you get uncomfortable and the employee may bring up things and topics and issues, and you chase that and you get very uncomfortable and you never get out what you need to. So we kind of put this together and got a lot of great feedback from people when they used it. So it's a structured meeting out of respect for the employee. Share your hopes and your expectations for all your employees in your area. You know, it's a quick summary. I hope you and everyone else feels you have the education, the information, the tools to do your job. I value everyone in the work group. We all have different views and ideas. And today I'm here to have a very difficult conversation with you. It's hard for me to say, it's hard for you to hear, but you're important enough, and the process of what we do is important enough that you need to hear where I'm at and where leadership is at, right? Even if it's uncomfortable for both of us. I'm going to start off then. A is kind of let you be aware of the issues, concerns that I and or leadership have regarding something and your performance or behavior. And again, understand that you may or may not agree with me. I get all that. I need to highlight this as a great care for you. Again, as my employee and as a person, here's what I'm seeing that is great concern. Very short. I highlight it. I do all my prep work before I have my meeting to make sure I can even read it. Some managers say to me, can I read it? You can read it. Doesn't matter. Just because in fairness, the employee needs to hear it. They can take notes in the meeting out of respect to them. They need to hear where you're at. F is for the future. I need to know what the future is going to, for right now, the future is going to, as this moment, no longer, if it's a behavioral issue, can this continue, right? If it's a performance issue, here's the future, here's the plan we're putting together to address the knowledge issue, the error issue, in the future needs to change like now. And here's the plan. I'll work with you on the plan, but we need to make progress. And then the E is the last part of the meeting, which is just a basic, the meeting purpose is to extend an opportunity, invite you to make needed changes, because my only goal is to help you be completely successful in both behavior and performance as an employee. And then we say in a couple days, we have a meeting. I want to hear your thoughts. It's a short meeting. I want to understand your thoughts and your views about what I presented, right? Very important to do. It's key to do. In a couple days, the employee either comes back and tells you what they don't agree with, and maybe they're going up to a different complaint process, and that's their right. That's okay. I'm still going to manage you the way I said. Kind of the end of a meeting. On the other hand, they may agree or not agree with what you say, but commit to work together to solve whatever the issues are and make needed changes, right? Much more to say, but I at least want to throw it out there in that model so that there's an idea of having a very difficult conversation in fairness to the employee. Try to go through quickly some things that are really, really important. Just employee retention. Employee retention, to me, 4 major areas. Make jobs easier. It's pretty simplistic, right? When we remove unnecessary barriers, so I usually give managers a task to go through certain job tasks, take a look at the processes. Where are there outdated procedures? Where is there ineffectual kind of processes that could be improved? It's all about making things more efficient. Can you help your employees do things quicker with less problems or less labor intense, whatever it is? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But when you do that, you show that you care about what employees do, obviously, moment to moment. And we certainly care about improving their own subjective well-being in the workplace with removing unnecessary obstacles. I just can't say it enough. Manage problem behaviors are critically important. I find this is a big deficit based upon how people are kind of cognitively and emotionally wired, right? And whether they believe it's in their purview or not. A lot of managers call me and say, can you meet with these employees or this employee? Because I'm not a psychologist. I don't know how to deal with this conflict or personality. And I say, absolutely not. I'll help you figure out how you can respond to it. I'm not in charge of them. You are. And part of the key part of the job is learning how to manage people differences and behaviors, right? So if we don't manage problem behaviors, then other employees tend to become disgruntled and sometimes leave quietly because they don't like watching inappropriate behaviors that are not addressed by others, right? It can be damaging to retention and turnover. Demonstrate respect when in disagreement, but firm. I can't state this enough. And we're in charge of us no matter how much the other individual is frustrated or tries to elicit a response. We're in charge of us, and we'll be respectful but firm. Very firm, and be respectful when we disagree. People will disagree. Life is about disagreement. But the workplace has certain control features to take care of that, because if we just have total disagreement, we have chaos. So we have to have some order. And so we have to be respectful, but very firm. And the last thing I talk about with managers is some positions can and can't, about flexibility and scheduling, obviously time away at times, and certainly job task autonomy, how people do what they do. We know in leadership, those are the 2 traits that create retention for leaders. When people are in leadership and they remove that has been removed, their ability to be flexible and some of their time away, and certainly how they do the tasks they do, they usually lose the rewards that make the leadership positions valuable, right? And the same with employees. Whenever they can, depending, again, sometimes it's very difficult with frontline staff. Some positions have more flexibility and autonomy than others. But those are 4 keys to take a look at in work areas that can be beneficial. So I mentioned a little bit about resilience and just put what the APA put down, and this is going to tie in when I wrap up the presentation and talk about all these things about what leads to burnout, what leads to stress, inordinate amount of stress. What do we do about burnout? What do we do about resilience and stress? They all come together, which is really nice, about what is the portal? What is the way out? What is the way to manage, right? So interestingly enough, they highlight the things that I would know immediately and you would know, which is relationships. That having healthy relationships, people that we care about, and fostering time and investing is one of the most important things that we can do. Lots of research out there, just doing a Google research and anecdotally knowing that we are built to relate, that emotional health does not do well. And those studies go back from the 50s on about being in isolation and not relating with people. So people who have resilient behaviors, meaning they get through adverse times, they experience them like other people, but some of the things that they do that looks like help prevent some of the damage going through difficult times on our physical and emotional health. Really investing in relationships, caring about spending time and engaging with people that we do care about, right? Doesn't mean if, try to invest in relationships that are completely conflictual, that's probably not going to work out very well. But when we have relationships that we care greatly and have a common element, doesn't mean we don't have some conflict. Really important. Lifestyle wellness, can't say enough about that, obviously. That's huge. Mindfulness is an important topic to highlight. If we look in the literature, a lot of literature about this, but there's not really a universal definition. You have different groups, societies, people who practice that talk about mindfulness. So when I use mindfulness here, I think mindfulness is we put it all together, the pieces. We're talking about people being aware in the moment of what we're feeling, what's actually happening in our thoughts and our feeling life, not being overly critical, not being critical, judgmental, just kind of looking at our state where we're at, feel it, avoid negativity, avoid criticalness, right? Avoid those kinds of thoughts. Some people will do prayer. Some people will do journaling as they think about how they're feeling and experiencing, being mindful about what's happening around me before I kind of react. One of the things for people that have quick tempers is trying to help and teach and have to work hard and practice. How do I not react? Because my body wants me to react, right? Our emotions, I need to back up and say this. When an event happens, we have a cognitive, complicated process that I've mentioned. But then we have emotions. Emotions happen instantaneously, automatically, whether we're aware of it or not. And what we call our emotions is called feelings. So when people end up feeling an emotion of stress, they may say, well, they may mean that they have a little bit of nausea because blood's leaving their stomach and going quickly because they're upset. They may feel shaky. They may feel a little anxious overall. That's a biologic function. And what we give that names to, we call it anxiousness or stress, or we call it being perplexed or happy or angry. We give it a label, right? And so when people are trying to practice mindfulness, they're just kind of aware of what's happening in their body, what's happening in their thoughts, right? And being able to be careful and see that for what it is and think about ways and healthy ways eventually to respond, avoid negative ways to manage stress. Can't eliminate stress, as I mentioned. That really is a nonsensical concept when we understand stress is a very important system, just like all of our other bodily systems. It's a very important part of our system to help protect and guide us. Find purpose and help others. Research after research I'll talk about soon talks about finding purpose, helping others. The things that we think will make us happy as intently as we'd like and as long as we like, we're not very good at picking at all. But what does bring people happiness is when they do certain things for other people, when we give to others, when we care about time, investment, and helping and doing others, people report much higher levels, right? Being able to be resilient and happy and move toward attainable goals, including daily goals. So a lot of times we have to focus when we're really stressed. When I was working with people through the pandemic and they had massive stress, it wasn't good enough to give yourself some reward at the end of the week. It doesn't work. You got to do daily stuff, even simple stuff. Like today, here's what I'm going to wear this today. Here's what I'm going to eat, my favorite snack. When I have 10 minutes of a break, this is what I'm going to do, something I really enjoy. For me, it might be when I get home or late in the evening. I'm going to age myself here, but I'll say, you know what? I'm going to put on an episode of Seinfeld or Frasier for some of you who know those episodes. I know I'm getting older. I mentioned that, and somebody looked at me the other day and they said, "What's a Seinfeld?" I went, "Oh no," or "What's Frasier?" So, what is it that works for us to give us a daily joy moment or moments, right? Something that we like. Really important when we're dealing with issues that we don't have control over. It's what counselors do constantly. Certainly we do that when people experience death and loss, the ultimate lack of control. You must have daily issues of control and help people find ways to daily manage control, which manages their nervous system and the anxiousness and pain. Interestingly enough, happy people per this university researcher in the UK, and this tells us what we kind of know, but why employers should care about us as people, of course, and also as employees and being good for work, better at decision making, more accurate proofreading, less distractible, less irritable, better memories, and the evidence that practicing being optimistic produces happiness, which is very, very interesting. I'll talk about in a minute that sometimes I've done it. Maybe you go, yeah, poo poo, ha ha, right? Like I'm going to be able to think something and change. But oddly enough, in some of the research, people that do put a conscientious effort in changing the inputs, what they put in themselves, often find big gains. All right, so I'm going to work on this happiness thing. Very important stuff here, because all of us, if there's one thing we all can kind of rally around, is we want to be happy. There's different definitions of happiness, and I'm going to use a research definition from this person that I have listed, Sonia Lubomirsky, a UCLA researcher. She's devoted close to 30 years of her life, her entire professional career, pretty much as being research on happiness. She's probably the leading leader of happiness across not only the country, the world, and studying it this long. And I love what she says, because many things she says make so much sense with what we kind of know, and a few things add an extra dimension. But she defines happiness. Number one, it means obviously experience of a positive emotion, joy, contentment, affection, interest, love, something that we feel is positive, that we feel in our emotional experience that we label as something good. If we look at happiness definitions, joy, you get all kinds of confusion, because if you look at the happiness definition, it'll talk about joy and contentment. If you look up what joy is, it'll talk about what happiness and contentment is. So as we look at this definition of happiness in the research piece, it says one piece of it is obviously what we experience in our emotional state. And the second part is a sense of satisfaction with life, the way that you're progressing toward your life goals. That's really important. She'll talk about that. And then happy people experience more positive than negative emotions, right? So she mentioned some really key pieces. We talked about the DNA piece, the 50% genetics. And, again, kind of a combination of genes and overall disposition and brain structure and activity. 10% in her research and others conclude circumstance, which is a little surprising that people would say only 10% of my circumstances lead to being happy. And because there's a lot of ways to be unhappy, but happiness seems to be a little more limited in the things that people do that are very similar that lead to happiness. It's not this wide open gate. And I'll explain that in a minute. And then 40% that would be left over to say, that's what she was talking about, to say what people think, what they say, what they do can actually change some of their overall well-being views of themselves and others in life that they experience. So that 40% is big, and we'll talk about things like mindfulness and about relationships, about giving, helping others, as you mentioned. These things tend to pay huge dividends that are called intrinsic satisfaction, right? The intrinsic activity, because you do it in and of itself as opposed to seeking an outcome, right? Now, it's interesting because we all know the research, we're not good at predicting what will make us happy how long. So I'll say a couple things, even relationships. Studies that look at people when they get married, they say, I want to be happier when I get married. And so research on this is interesting because it kind of shows, look, if all things being equal, people get married or in a substantial, significant committed relationship because they want to be. There's no forcing or other extra reasons other than I just care about you, you care about me, we love each other, we want each other. Research shows they are generally happier than for about 2 years during the marriage process than they were before. They return to potentially kind of the same level of happiness, and depending upon if it's a conflictual or problematic, they can be less happy. So and this happens with a lot of things, whether it's jobs or whether it's things that we want to buy. We have a set point almost, it looks like in the research, that says kind of here's the EKG line where you start at, and here's that baseline where we're at. We kind of get back to that no matter what happens, that we can fluctuate, we go up and down. Circumstances can make us very unhappy, obviously, lots of ways to be unhappy. And the reason that it looks like, whether we look at longer term issues that we think would make us happy, if I only had this person, if I had this job, if I had this house, because it's something called focalization. We focus in on all the positive things that are going to be from that change, and we miss all of life that's still going to be happening. We're still going to have maybe potential relationship issues or work issues or health issues or family issues or repair issues and household cost issues. But we tend to just narrow in on the thing that we think will make us happy. And it doesn't seem to make us happy, as she mentioned, as either as deep as we thought or as long. I mean, even the money, lots of research on money. The research on money does show if you're below that poverty or close to poverty line, money does obviously make a difference into your happiness much more than people who already are above the line. If you're somewhat substantially above the poverty line, the interesting part of it is research would say a number of years ago in some of the areas, depending on the socioeconomic, but if you made, even $65,000, $70,000, that you were no happier, different levels than people who had $1 million in their bank account or made millions a year. So research does not show that, but it does show it makes a difference, obviously, when you have basic needs that you need attended for, right? So time with people that we care about, investing in those intrinsic activities, relationships, hobbies, being grateful. As you mentioned, sometimes it sounds silly to some folks to say, why would I just be, grateful for 3 things a day? Because it looks like it does change. We're interactive creatures. We've been built for the world that we're in. And so it's a give and take. The arrow goes both ways. We can actually get happiness by the way our brains are just driven, some of us, but we also can get it by causing our brains to think and to behave in such a way that we contribute to our happiness by the overt things that we do. Being optimistic about the future, even trying to be, if you're a pessimist, even trying to be optimistic, right, about the future and realistically viewing that will lead to potentially just a high dip, if you will, or a small dip, I should say, in your overall happiness, right? Healthy lifestyles can change thoughts. What's the old adage? Change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. It's been around for centuries, or centuries, I should say. And that's an important piece of this, because other research kind of shows even when people think they have control, when they don't, they report being happier about certain things in the research experiment themselves. Their levels of happiness are much higher when they actually don't have any control, but they think they do, right? So kind of interesting. A lot more to talk about there. This is interesting. So neuroscience kind of stuff here. I just mentioned this for a second. It's really important to make this for some of you who are more into this, that the research when people are happier, when you look at the brain imaging techniques, you look at the brain, the amygdala that I talked about, the center that controls an awful lot of our reactions, fear, anger, anxiousness, all in an effort probably to keep us well. When you look at people being stressed, report less happiness levels. We see a lot of activity in the amygdala and a lot of activity in their left prefrontal cortex. And those 2 areas tend to trigger then the release of these stress hormones. Conversely, when you look at the structure of people who report higher levels of happiness, you see lower activities, lower wave movement, electrical impulses, chemicals. You see lower activities in the amygdala and the left prefrontal cortex, and you see a higher amount in the right prefrontal cortex. And so what does that tell us? It tells us that there is actually structure differences in how the brain operates by its different parts, what it actually does. And we have that arrow that can impact some of that by actually what we do and what we think can actually stimulate. And they've shown that through open brain kinds of surgical techniques and pressing on the brain and creating different feelings and different experiences just by stimulating different parts of the brain. It's like when people say, well, think again about when we make a declaration, right? And we say, I want to be healthier, I want to do something, and our emotional state changes 2 days later, an hour later. And it's hard to do that because different parts of the brain are receiving information and they fight for some control, right? And the more that we're using our own muscle, if you will, about consciously fighting to make sure we're thinking positive or good things, not fake things, being realistic, but positive and good, looks like it can actually change some neuroactivity in the brain. I thought this was worth putting up. Just being outside in nature. So this researcher showed that just being outside amongst and the green, so to speak, especially, but it could be anywhere, it could be on the beach like these people, something that you like. If you're outside in smog and congestion, probably not, but especially in green spaces, that the brain, no matter what you're doing outside, doing work outside or something, the brain seems to light up in a different activity pattern that shows more contentment or happiness regions being activated. Just natural surroundings promote greater happiness. And that's really important. Again, we're built to interact and be part of the environment. So that really doesn't surprise me too much, because we're supposed to see the incredible beauty. There's incredible challenge and an incredible beauty outside when we look around at nature itself, right? So as I wind up here and give time for some Q&A, I want to talk about putting this all together, that as we put it all together, the goal for us is to look at things like being grateful for what we have, being able to help appropriately, volunteer, help others, not just self, seems to be a really important part of something called contentment, which is a part of happiness, but is more of, I like to define it as when we go through a tough time, we feel the tough time, everyone feels it. Happy people, people that aren't always necessarily happy feel it. Happy people feel it too. It's just that because of their belief system and their cognitive way that they view life, purpose, meaning, they still feel okay, in a sense that they have purpose or meaning, even through incredible loss. I've worked with people intimately over tragic loss. When people, because depending on how they respond, they either come out bitter, resentful, and angry, or they come out with a new appreciation, a changed life perspective, and a new appreciation of the value and the shortness of life and the value of life, even with incredible pain. And it all has to do with the way that we actually think and view our existence, right? Very powerful stuff. More in the research that needs to happen, just the power of our thoughts itself. So we generally think of joy as a feeling of great pleasure. There was a researcher here that spoke recently in Mayo, Ingrid Feldman, I believe is her name. I may have that wrong, but I'll try to look it up as I talk. And I love what a couple of things that she said. Ingrid Fatale, and she's kind of a happiness person and done a lot of research on joy specifically. And she talks about joy moments. And I do think we have joy moments. It could be colors and shapes, things that we see outside in beauty. It's the moments of things. And when we don't go looking for it, we don't see it. When we're aware of it, we see it. It's kind of like when I remember being a kid and we were young and we look around and we see the stars and we see the moon and we see the sun and we see plants and trees and all kinds of species life. And it's incredible. And then we get busy. Life comes along, and next thing you know, we go to school, and then we have homework, and then we have sports, and then we go through adolescence, and we grow up in adults, and we've got now jobs, and we've got duties and household, and we have a narrow view. The view of life starts to become narrow. We only see it through the eyes of our stressors that we have or our duties, and we don't see the beauty around us. So just trying to notice and realizing that joy is not something that we have 8 hours of joy, but we looked at moments of joy, the baby, colors, to kids playing, being able to sit on your favorite spot and just relax or read, these joyful moments, right? So it's part of happiness. Some people will define joy as doing things that are intrinsic activities. That's a good way. It's in the same way we talk about high level of happiness, intrinsic activities that are designed just for the sake of doing it. You like the hobby, you like the relation, sharing time with somebody. Really important things, right? Happy or joyful people still experience those negative thoughts, but they do maintain a sense of contentment, right? Something that we want to put it all together. Mindfulness, really important. Gratitude, being mindful of moments that we're in, being mindful of what we have, not just what we don't have. Getting outside in nature, looking at the quality of our life and what are the goals that we want, not what other people necessarily to keep up with them or what they want. What do we want in our goals? What do we want? Helping others, just the act of helping others seems to be incredibly important. And the last thing that I'll mention, and then we'll see what kind of Q&A you have or comments. Having been a counselor most of my life and working with people intimately, the one thing that gets not talked about an awful lot is that the obvious in life ends. And we know from science, the law of thermodynamics, right? And entropy, everything wears out. Everything becomes a little more chaotic and disordered, including us. But the inside of us can grow with incredible beauty. We take care of ourselves, hopefully the best we can, but we know we do fade. And I think it's hard for people to feel that experience of deeper happiness or contentment until they wrestle with that. And I find there's not a lot of opportunities for that unless people have within their faith, or they have someone that they talk to intimately about these deeper life things. It seems really important because it's something that people are going to experience. And then as we get older, we certainly watch people around us. So I think it's an element that's added into our overall contentment and our satisfaction with life, is wrestling with deep purpose and meaning, even the loss of life at some point. So let me end and ask my last slide, we do in fact have some control how we perceive and ultimately feel about life, no matter what we face. And that's really important, that we do have some control over how we think and what we do.
Thank you for participating. Please click the button below to complete the evaluation and obtain credit.